Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mondays on Mondays. Today you're going to get the abbreviated version, basically because my son, the CDH warrior, is occupied with his college work at this point. He's working on a degree in psychology, and that's going to take its precedence. But this is one that usually I provide a lot in this. He provides some other aspects in CDH Survivor, which is, I think the title is We Survived This, Now What? Just going through the background, some of you have seen this before. He had congenital diaphragmatic hernia at birth, and he has survived that. He was given a 30 to 50% chance of survival. He's 28 now. The options and possibilities of survival have greatly increased since that time. Part of that was the doctor that worked with him during his treatment and surgeries was developing at that point some new protocols for treatment of CDH, and with that, the probability of survival now, in many cases, since it's detected earlier, and there are better protocols and better facilities in terms of having the capabilities to treat this condition, has now increased to 80 to 90% chance of survival. So part of what he does there is providing some insight to families that have young CDH children that there is the opportunity for long-term survival and long-term normal life. In his case, it was one, by the time he was entering elementary school, the issues related to his congenital diaphragmatic hernia had subsided and pretty much taken care of themselves with the surgeries that had been done and the repairs that have been done. And we haven't had any long-term issues following that. Some of the issues with that relate to lung function, heart issues, the organs inside the abdominal cavity shift around, and there can be constrictions of the GI tract, those type of things that can cause long-term and fairly critical conditions that have to be dealt with. Part of the reason that we do this segment is more from the family standpoint of how to deal with children with long-term childhood illnesses. From our family background, my son was our first. He had the congenital diaphragmatic hernia. My daughter was born 2 years later, and we thoroughly examined her pre-birth and then after birth, and she had no congenital conditions. But at less than 2 years old, she developed a condition called aplastic anemia, which was basically her entire bone marrow system shut down. So her body was not creating red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and was not regenerating the bone marrow. And that meant that she was having transfusions extremely regularly, at least once or twice a week in most cases. And with that, we had to go through treatments and then a bone marrow transplant, a stem cell transplant. We were able to find an umbilical donor that had a close match to her, so we were able to use those stem cells. So we went through several years of her treatment and post-transplant issues, and the issues related to that, and also a condition called graft versus host disease, where your blood system attacks what it considers foreign bodies, and we've changed the blood system then it considers many parts of your body as foreign bodies. So that's the reason we do this discussion. What I will be bringing up a little bit after the introduction part is going into how to deal with the bonding and the early phases of your child's life if your child is in the hospital, particularly in a neonatal intensive care unit, and how can you deal with that. As a disclaimer, what we typically explain is that we are not medical professionals. We are not doctors or nurses, although we do have a lot of experience in hospitals and medical treatment just because of the conditions that my children went through. We're also not in social work, psychologists, sociologists. We're not therapists, but we have almost 3 decades of experience in dealing with these type conditions. And what we want to do is provide a forum so that we can provide a place to discuss some of those issues that come up to play. For those of you that have watched, we're going to miss my son's part of this where we go through the introduction and then he says, and roll the title. So thank you very much for joining us again. And welcome back. As I mentioned previously, the discussion that we're going to talk about today, or I'm going to talk about today, is related to how do you deal with the bonding with a child when they're going through traumatic health issues, medical issues, times in the hospital, and how do you balance that out? And this is not a clear answer to how to deal with that, because every situation, both as the child's condition, the hospital, the family dynamic, all of those things come into play with how do you deal with trying to deal with bonding with a child, but then also handle normal life as you're going through those functions. So what I'm going to do is more just from discussions of our standard experience that we had with my 2 children. The first was with my son, who had a congenital condition, the diaphragmatic hernia. So he was immediately in the NICU. In his condition, it was one that he was born in a hospital. We did not know about the condition prior to his birth. So when he was born, he was not in a high-level neonatal intensive care unit and had to be transported to another facility. So he was air flighted within a couple of hours of birth to another facility over 100 miles away, and had surgery there before I could even make the transition from the one hospital to the other after getting my wife settled at the hospital where she delivered. And after the surgery, his condition deteriorated, and in less than 12 hours, he was transferred to another hospital, which was 4 hours away. So we weren't able to have that immediate contact with my son, but it was also when he was heavily sedated and had the surgery, so we're not sure how much interaction he would have been involved with. But the question has come up, and this is one that we see in some of the social media sites and the things that we deal with on a regular basis, because there are a number of sites related to congenital diaphragmatic hernia, aplastic anemia, graft versus host disease, some of those. And then we're also linked to therapists and also early child intervention specialists. So they provide some insight to us on some of these items that people have questions about and discuss. In our case, what we were able to do is my son was born on a Thursday. As I said, he had surgery a few hours after that. Thursday evening, I was at the other hospital where he had the surgery and was able to check on his condition there post-surgery in their NICU. And his condition deteriorated very quickly. I could not really spend time with him there. Was actually sleeping in a waiting room when they contacted me, and this was early morning hours, about 2 a.m., and said they were going to have to transfer him to another hospital. So I went in, managed to check on him and just kind of get a visual on his condition prior to leaving there, driving back to the hospital where my wife was, seeing her in the early morning hours when she woke up in the hospital, and explaining what was going on and what the conditions were. So by this time it's Friday. I took Friday to get her settled, get her parents in place to help take care of her, make sure she was settled and taken care of and had support. And then a friend and I drove the next day on Saturday to the other hospital, which was about 4.5 or 5 hours away, to check on my son's condition. So there's a lot of massive dynamics that go on when you're having to deal with a child that has a severe medical condition and is having to be hospitalized, surgeries, all of those types of conditions going on. Please excuse the dogs in the background. We have hound dogs, so they are noticeably noisy. But what I was able to do was be there on Saturday when my son was being stabilized at the hospital he'd been transferred to. And the doctor there was just at the early phases of developing a protocol for treatment of children with congenital diaphragmatic hernia, the CDH. As a matter of fact, my son was actually one of the first couple of dozen cases that he had used in that trial to develop the protocol and the procedures. So I was able to spend a little bit of time with him and talk with the doctors, get a better understanding of what his condition would be. The surgery had been done, his diaphragm had been repaired, but he was on ventilation and sedated, and a lot of the hospital monitors and IVs and all of the other that was going on, oxygen. But within a few hours that evening on Saturday night, as I said, he'd been born on Thursday, his condition greatly deteriorated. The doctor and I had already discussed that he was stable, but that his oxygen saturations were in a level that did have some concern. And we did discuss that we might have to go on to ECMO, which is external corporeal membrane oxygenation. Basically, it's a heart-lung bypass. And we discussed that might be necessary. We did not expect that within a few hours of that discussion, the doctor would come to me and say, we need to do that immediately. So he was fairly quickly placed on the ECMO unit. And again, that's a period of time that he had to be heavily sedated going on that unit. I was there while he was put on the ECMO and was able to see him after he was placed on ECMO and check on him on the NICU early Sunday morning. And then Sunday afternoon drove back to my wife several hours away, checked on her to see how she was doing. She was being released from the hospital. She was at home. We settled what we could, and a couple of days later, then we drove back down to the hospital to check on my son. Some of the resources that are available and this is where I see some of the items on the social media, is people trying to figure out how do you deal with, living arrangements when you're having to be at a hospital away from home. In our case, we were very fortunate to be able to take advantage of Ronald McDonald House. There was an opening available, and we were able to check into the Ronald McDonald House, which was close by the hospital, and able to go back and forth. And I had an employer that was accommodating, that would allow me time off from work to help during the distressful situation for the first couple of weeks to get settled there. So my wife and I stayed at Ronald McDonald House, get up in the mornings, go check on our son, spend time with him, and basically we spent a lot of time just hand-holding, talking with the doctors, talking with the nurses, just trying to be available to deal with the situation and understand the situation and learn as much as we could as quickly as possible at the hospital in the hospital setting. Now, in our condition, as I said, my employer was very good about being accommodating. My wife was not working at that point in time, and we did not have other children. So from that standpoint, we had the freedom to be able to do that. If it's a family where you've got other children and you've got to make those accommodations, you're away from home, then it becomes very stressful trying to figure out how to balance out the time that you're doing in that. But one of the things that we did do while I was there at the hospital was we were able to borrow a audio recording device. At that time, it was just basically cassette tapes. But my wife and I recorded bedtime stories and just regular children's books that we would envision that we would be reading to my son after he came home. We put those on tapes, so that way the nurses were very good about playing those from time to time, so that he was able to hear our voices and equate that we were still in some way with him, even if we weren't at the hospital at that time. After a couple of weeks, it became necessary that I went back to work. My wife stayed at the hospital at Ronald McDonald House and was back and forth to take care. My son was in the hospital for almost 3 months. So during that time, what we did was doing a balance of I would go work during the week, then on Fridays after work, drive down, see her. Then she had the opportunity to take the vehicle, take the car, drive back home, spend a couple of days to relax and decompress, because being in a medical hospital, particularly a neonatal intensive care unit, very stressful, high stress situation. You're dealing with the life of your child. So there are times that you need to find the opportunity to decompress and separate yourself from that. So she and I worked out that balance going back and forth. That actually gave us some insight for later on, when we had a similar type situation with my daughter, that she unexpectedly developed some issues that were of concern. We were able to talk with the doctor. The doctor said, bring her into the emergency room. I'm going to be there tomorrow. Let me evaluate. The doctor did what testing was available in the town that we were in, determined that it was one of 2 very serious conditions, and within a few hours we had to leave there and take her to the hospital. And we went to the same hospital we've been with my son, which again was several hours away. But that evening we put my son with friends to help take care of him while we took my daughter to the hospital to be evaluated. That's when they determined it was aplastic anemia. We started looking at the treatment protocols, the plans. It took a couple of weeks to evaluate how severe the condition was, and determined that it was a very severe aplastic anemia, and that she was going to need transfusions, as I said, at least 1 or 2 transfusions a week, and that if we weren't able to get a transplant quickly, then once you get so many transfusions, the capability of being able to do a bone marrow transplant greatly diminish. So we had to look at that very quickly. So once again, we're in a situation where within just 24, 48 hours, we're in a high stress situation. But what we were able to do, we had left my son with friends, and he was staying with them while we did the evaluation with my daughter. Once we saw how critical her condition was going to be, we had to make arrangements for my son and how we were going to deal with that. So we were fortunate that my in-laws, his grandparents, agreed that they would keep him while we dealt with my daughter. So for several months, my son had to stay with his grandparents while we took care of my daughter. And at this point in time, he's 3-4 years old. Somewhere in the 3 to 4 year range, just about ready to transition to a 4-year-old. So again, we had to figure out how to balance that out and make sure that my son had support and the family support, but that we could concentrate on my daughter's condition and those type situations. So that's what we did in our case, and we were fortunate to have that capability. And there were a couple of opportunities where I was able to come and visit, because when I say the grandparents were keeping him, the grandparents were 12 hours away. So it was not like an easy overnight, let's stop in and see how my son was doing. So these are the type of things that parents, when you're dealing with a child that has a medical condition, you've got the stress of having to deal with the health of your child, but then you've also got the stress of how to deal with the family dynamic, how to deal with being a parent and taking care of your children and doing the necessary things there. So this was just a discussion that we felt from the insight that we got from several sources needed to be discussed. We would like some feedback from viewers and people that see these. You can contact us on the social media outlets for those of you that are involved with the CDH or with the aplastic anemia or graft versus host disease sites. Or also we have a email. It's my son will put it up on the screen. I think it's Mondays on Monday 4@gmail.com, but it will be scrolled into the titles for this. But once again, thank you for the opportunity to come into your house and talk about some of these conditions, and have a great week. Thank you once again. Goodbye.